Lesson 4. Protecting Food in Preparation. We have already learned measures to prevent contamination in purchasing, receiving, and storage. In this lesson, we will look at ways to further reduce the possibility of contamination in preparing, cooking, serving and holding, cooling, and reheating of foods. After this lesson, you will be able to identify safe food practices for preparation in a food service operation. Contamination can happen, and bacteria may grow when food is handled often and for long periods of time. It is important to remember to keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold to prevent bacteria from growing. Your goal is to cut down handling time, keep proper food temperatures, and limit the risk of contamination from your hands or other objects. Preparation. The most important rule for food protection is that all potentially hazardous food must be kept at an internal temperature below 41 degrees Fahrenheit or above 135 degrees Fahrenheit, out of the temperature danger zone, during transport, storage, handling, preparation, display, and service. Also, potentially hazardous food cannot remain at temperatures in the danger zone for more than a total of 4 hours. The time is cumulative, which means that the time food spends in all stages of handling, including receiving, storage, preparation, and holding, add up. ND Food Code Section 7.3 Time as a Public Health Control. The food is served or discarded within 4 hours from the point in time when the food is removed from temperature control. Note, this is a critical control point. In many school food service operations, the first step in food preparation process is the thawing of frozen foods. The ND Food Code has some specific stipulations regarding thawing of foods. ND Food Code Section 17. Thawing potentially hazardous foods. 1. In refrigerated units at a temperature not to exceed 41 degrees Fahrenheit. 2. Under potable water of 70 degrees Fahrenheit or below, with sufficient water velocity to agitate and float off loose food particles into the overflow for a period of time that does not allow thawed portions of ready-to-eat food to rise above 41 degrees Fahrenheit, or for a period of time that does not allow thawed portions of raw animal food requiring cooking to be above 41 degrees Fahrenheit for more than 4 hours, including the time needed for preparation for cooking or the time it takes under refrigeration to lower the food temperature to 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Section 17 continued. 3. In a microwave oven only when the food will be immediately transferred to conventional cooking facilities as part of a continuous cooking process, or when the entire uninterrupted cooking process takes place in the microwave oven. 4. As part of the conventional cooking process. This slide sums up what the ND Food Code stipulates regarding how to thaw food. Why should foods never be thawed at room temperature? Thawing at room temperature keeps food too long in the temperature danger zone. Remove from storage and prepare only what is needed. Never thaw foods on a counter or any other non-refrigerated area. You need to plan ahead for thawing large items and should not refreeze thawed food. Cold food preparation is one of the most hazardous points in the food preparation process because it usually takes place at room temperature. It is also one of the most common points of contamination and cross-contamination. Some precautions for cold foods are: chill meats and other ingredients and combine them while chilled. Prepare foods no further in advance than necessary. Prepare foods in small batches and immediately place in cold storage. Always hold prepared cold foods below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Wash fresh fruits and vegetables with plain water. Use a brush to scrub thick-skinned produce. Beware of cross-contamination. Keep raw products separate from ready-to-serve foods. Sanitize cutting boards, knives, and other food contact surfaces after each contact with a potentially hazardous food. Discard any leftover batter, breading, or marinade after it has been used for potentially hazardous foods. Safe cooking tips. The following are some safe cooking tips for you to follow. Stir foods cooked in deep pots frequently to ensure thorough cooking. Allow cooking equipment to reheat between batches. Regulate size and thickness of each portion to make cooking time predictable and uniform. Never interrupt the cooking process. Monitor the accuracy of heating equipment with each use by using thermometers. Always use a sanitized thermometer to ensure foods reach the proper internal temperature during cooking. Avoid recontamination. Whatever cooking method is selected, the risk of bacteria surviving is best controlled by cooking the food product to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, which will ensure the safety of the food. In the ND Food Code, it specifies safe cooking temperatures when cooking raw animal foods. Pictured are 4 examples. Don't forget to take readings in at least 2 locations of the food, including the thickest section, which will most likely be the center, to be sure that it is cooking evenly. To avoid getting a false reading, be careful not to touch the pan or bone with the thermometer. What is just-in-time cooking, and why is it important? Just-in-time cooking is breaking down the task or preparing a large number of portions in smaller batches. When you pull out more food than you can work with in a short time, you leave all of it in the temperature danger zone longer than necessary. While preparing foods such as soups or stews, there are times you may want to sample it to see if it tastes as it should. This is the correct method of tasting food. Never use your fingers for a quick taste test. Take sample from pot with spoon. Transfer sample to small dish. Move with the sample away from the pot. Using a clean spoon, not the one used to transfer the sample from the pot, taste the sample. Put the spoon used to sample the food in the sink for washing. Do not reuse a spoon for tasting a second time. Never put the spoon that was used for tasting back into the pot of food. ND Food Code Section 9.1 Preventing Contamination when Tasting. A food employee may not use a utensil more than once to taste food that is to be sold or served. Note: this is a critical control point. Serving and holding. Even if food is handled properly from receiving through the cooking and holding process, the service of food is another point where contamination can endanger food safety. Keep hot foods in hot holding equipment above 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Use hot holding equipment such as steam table and hot food carts during service, but never for reheating a food. Keep foods covered to retain heat and to guard against contamination. Keep utensils in food, handles extended to avoid cross-contamination. Stir foods at reasonable intervals to ensure even heating. Check temperatures every 30 minutes with food thermometer. Keep cold foods in a refrigeration unit or surrounded by ice below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Discard any food held in the temperature danger zone for more than 4 hours. Never add fresh food to a serving pan containing foods that have already been out for serving. Customers can also act as a source of contamination. Observe customer behavior as they go through the line. Remove any foods that may have been contaminated. Example, customer touching food with hands, sneezed or coughed onto food, or dipped fingers into food to taste them. Cooling. Rapid cooling and the protection from contamination are the keys to protecting food during the cooling process. Here are some methods for cooling foods. 1. Reduce the quantity of the food being cooled. Cut large pieces of food into smaller pieces, or divide food into smaller containers. 2. Cool food quickly with a blast chiller or tumble chiller before refrigerating. 3. Use ice water baths. Divide cooked food into shallow pans, then place them in ice water. Stir food items frequently. 4. Add ice or cold water as an ingredient after cooking to cool the product. Initially prepare the recipe with less water than required. This works for foods that contain water as an ingredient, such as a soup or stew. 5. Stir foods to cool foods faster and more evenly. Ice paddles, which are plastic paddles that are filled with water and frozen, can be used to stir foods during the cooling process and help cool foods very quickly. Using small flat containers will cool foods more quickly than large deep containers because of their large surface area. Bulky foods, such as roasts, should be sliced to 3-inch thickness before refrigerating because thicker pieces stay warm in the center long enough for dangerous growth of bacteria to occur. Generally speaking, the ideal container for refrigerated storage is less than 6 inches deep, with a product depth of no more than 4 inches. Since the standard counter pan is used in virtually all food service operations, it is an ideal storage container. Plastic buckets and deep inserts are not recommended for cooling foods because they are typically more than 6 inches deep. Why is it important to cool food quickly? The quicker the product cools, the less opportunity bacteria will have to multiply. Here are some examples of improper cooling. When cooked foods are left at room temperature for several hours before refrigeration, dangerous bacteria multiply. When foods are placed in a refrigerator in large, deep containers, cooling occurs very slowly. Even though the exterior cools in contact with cold air, the part of the product in the center of the container becomes a breeding ground for dangerous bacteria, and remains so for hours. Large, bulky foods cool very slowly. In fact, researchers have found that the internal temperature of an 8-pound roast placed in a walk-in cooler took over 5 hours to fall from 135 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and an additional 12 hours to drop below 45 degrees Fahrenheit. For leftovers in amounts greater than ½ gallon or 2 pounds, reduce the food mass. Chill. Stir frequently. Measure the temperature periodically. Cover and label cooled foods with preparation dates and times. Cool foods using the 2-stage cooling method. ND Food Code Section 7.3 Cooling. Cooked potentially hazardous food shall be cooled from 135 degrees Fahrenheit to 41 degrees Fahrenheit or less in 6 hours, provided that the food is cooled from 135 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit within the first 2 hours. Note, this is a critical control point. This 2-stage cooling method can be explained more clearly. Cool cooked hot foods from 135 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit or lower within 2 hours, and from 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower within 4 hours, for a total cooling time of 6 hours or less. Take temperatures at the 2-hour and 6-hour intervals to ensure appropriate temperatures are reached within these time frames. Reheating. Equally important in preventing the spread of foodborne illness is reheating foods. Here are some do's and don'ts when reheating leftovers. Heat food to a minimum of 165 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours of taking the food out of the refrigerator. Never use hot holding equipment to reheat food. Never mix a leftover batch of food with a fresh batch of food. Never reheat food more than once. When reheating for hot holding, the ND Food Code specifies ND Food Code Section 14, Reheating for Hot Holding. 1. Potentially hazardous food that is cooked, cooled, and reheated for hot holding shall be reheated so that all parts of the food reach a temperature of at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. 2. Potentially hazardous food reheated in a microwave oven for hot holding shall be reheated so that all parts of the food reach a temperature of at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit and the food is rotated or stirred, covered, and allowed to stand covered for 2 minutes after reheating. Note: this is a critical control point. Reheating the food to 165 degrees Fahrenheit will kill harmful bacteria that may have been multiplying in the food if exposed to the temperature danger zone. Never keep leftovers that have been refrigerated for more than 7 days. The ND Food Code states, ND Food Code Section 7, Potentially Hazardous Food, Hot and Cold Holding. Potentially hazardous food shall be maintained at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or less for a maximum of 7 days. Note: this is a critical control point. We have now gone through the 8 steps in the food service process and pointed out potential hazards that might be faced. In addition to washing hands and avoiding cross-contamination, it is important to maintain temperatures at each operational step to limit the amount of time food is in the temperature danger zone. Purchasing. Purchase food from a reputable supplier who follows HACCP procedures. Receiving. Receive refrigerated foods at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below and frozen foods at 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below. Reject if there is evidence of thawing or refreezing. Get items into storage as soon as possible. Storing. Store refrigerated foods at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and store frozen foods at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or below. Preparing. Limit the time that food is in the temperature danger zone during preparation. Batch cooking is the best way to limit time. Cooking. Cook food to the appropriate temperature for that item. Serving and holding. Serve cold foods cold, below 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and hot foods hot, above 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Hold cold foods at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and hot foods at 135 degrees Fahrenheit or above. Cooling. Cool foods as quickly as possible. The FDA Food Code and the ND Food Code require that foods are cooled from 135 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours, and from 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 41 degrees Fahrenheit within an additional 4 hours. If food is not cooled from 135 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours, the food must be reheated to 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds, and the cooling process started over. Take actions to speed the cooling process up, such as dividing food into smaller portions, using ice water baths, using an ice paddle, and stirring. Reheating. Reheat all leftover foods to 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds within 2 hours. Note: for transporting food, transport cold foods cold at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and hot food at 135 degrees Fahrenheit or above. Before going on to the review questions and the final lesson, grab your pencil and paper to write down the 5th digit of the training code. Ready? The 5th digit is the number 0. Take a minute to answer these questions with a response of either true or false. Here are the answers. Did you get them right? Please click on this link to go to Lesson 5, Clean Kitchen Savvy.